It really started with an interlocal agreement that was finalized by the state around September. In fact matters, I think the date is September the 13th, 1976. And our first meeting of the Greenbush board, 5-member board and 5 advisory members consisting of administrators, was in Erie, Kansas, September the 21st, 1976. So that happened pretty fast.
I was the superintendent at Erie, pre-Greenbush. In the beginning, it was a career education project for the State Department. And Dale Dennis, the assistant commissioner, asked me if I would house it. And I didn't have room for anyone, but I shared my desk with the one man that they had. And as it progressed, we bought a lawyer's office that had moved out across the street, so we'd have room for them. It was still career education. And as it progressed, then it needed more room, so we bought a trailer court across the street from the school with 2 trailers. We sold one of the trailers and put the career ed in the other one.
There was a 3-year federal grant that at that time was operating through the State Department of Education, the Division of Vocational Education, and it was operated out of Erie. And when those grants started to play out, monies were beginning to play out, the superintendents of the 9-county area decided to meet and decide whether something of this sort, educational-wise, should proceed. So when these superintendents of the 9 counties got together, they did decide that this should proceed, that there should be some work revolving industrial work with the schools. But they decided that if this interlocal was to become into effect, that there was a couple of provisos. One was that there wouldn't be any so-called membership fee, country club fee, we called it here. You paid for a program, and that was the only expense that was to be a part of the USDs. In other words, they didn't want to be a part of it, they didn't want a part of the program, it didn't cost them anything. If you did want the program, then you paid for the cost of the program plus a small percentage for administration purposes.
Greenbush, I think, still was unique in its formation when service centers began to form. And I think this was part of what has made Greenbush as effective as it is that the governing structure of Greenbush is totally different than any of the other service centers. There were, and still are, only 5 entities who have a representative on the actual governing board of Greenbush.
The schools were Erie, Riverton, Yates Center, Girard, and Fort Scott Juco.
You have to admire the administrators that started, because of I'm not sure all the board members read the contract, but the contract is rather binding. And we started, and we're going to incur some expense, and we have no one to go to if we fail to cover those expenses. So it takes the signature of the president of the board, who is liable, who is being counseled by his superintendent to sign that, which put the liability, 1/5 of the liability that may occur, onto the backs of the 5 original educational entities that are still on board. That took some intestinal fortitude.
You know, the superintendents had this vision that they could, on a cooperative basis, provide services to their kids who would otherwise be unavailable. And it was such a novel idea. Nobody had ever tried before in Kansas, and it was unique. It was a risk-taking venture.
I think this is a good move on the part of the superintendents because Greenbush has taken on an identity of its own. You know, it's not Girard or Cotterville or Fort Scott or Independence. It's Greenbush.
I had the opportunity to be on the Neodesha School Board at the time that Greenbush was being formed. And I thought that it was such a good idea for Southeast Kansas schools to come together in a positive way instead of as the little Balkans that we had always been known down in this neck of the woods, that I got to make the motion for the Neodesha School Board to be one of the forming districts and have never looked back.
I've worked for the Kansas Association of School Boards since 1970, so I was working for the association when Greenbush came into existence in 76 and 77. My most vivid recollections of that period are the requirement that state legislation be changed in order to allow Greenbush to become to do the concept that the folks had for Greenbush. Prior to that, there were a lot of local cooperatives, but they were mostly one-issue cooperatives. The idea for Greenbush to be what's called a service center was something that wasn't contemplated by the statutes at that time. So we were asked, my predecessor, Dr. Marion McGehee, was a good friend of Dr. Hatterline's. And Dr. Hatterline and Dr. McGehee and another past president of KASB, Don Crumbaker, who was in the Kansas legislature at the time, I think had some conversations, and I was doing some lobbying for the association. So I got involved in that time period in trying to get the legislation passed that would allow a regional service center. And I don't remember exactly, but I think at the time too, one of the issues was when Greenbush was formed, one of the entities that wanted to be involved was a community college. And there was not a piece of legislation then that allowed school districts and community colleges to form cooperatives. So that was a part of the legislative issue too. But those were some of the people who I think worked with the superintendents who had some of the idea for Greenbush in both getting the legislation accomplished and being visionary enough to make the legislation broad enough to allow Greenbush to become what it's become.
And we had 3 meetings of the board. Our original, when we started, as I say, the first meeting was in Erie in September 76, 21st. We had that meeting and 2 others. And in that time, we organized a board, and Mr. Shireman had suggested that perhaps this educational facility would be available to move out of Erie here.
I talked with Dr. Bob Hatterline about the possibility of maybe seeing if we couldn't house whatever we were going to do in Girard. We looked at several buildings in Girard and tried to think about what we might be able to do to encourage the program to be here in Girard. We had a 2-teacher school operating here at Greenbush that was in pretty good shape, the building was, and so Bob Hatterline and I met the parents who had children going to school here and talked to them about the possibility of sending their children to Girard to school and pointed out things that we might be able to do for them in Girard that we couldn't do for them in Greenbush. It was certainly, we didn't want the district to come out and vote to close their school. These parents agreed that they would send their children to Girard, and we deeded the building and the ground here to the Educational Service Center.
Well, the board thought that was a pretty good idea because we didn't have any money to pay rent further. I mean, didn't want to, and we wanted to get into larger quarters, and this was a 3-room elementary building with a cafeteria. And I remember when Mr. Shireman brought that a proposal to our USD 248 board. Of course, they were in the dark about what was happening also. And, well, why not? I said, if it's used for education, why, great. So Girard, USD 248, allowed the regional center to move here. And the move actually was made November the 29th, 1976. And our first meeting here in Greenbush was December 22nd, 1976. That was our first meeting here. We had considerable interference, I might say, from some of the superintendents. Not too many. Some just didn't bother to be involved. Some wrote letters and were rather vehement. I have a few that I still have in my file, and their main objection was another layer of bureaucracy. This is just another layer of bureaucracy, and we don't need it. We don't have the money to do what we want to do now, and we just can't see the concept. Most of the superintendents were not aware of the cooperative concept. They were not aware that this was happening in states. Fortunately, when I served on the national board, members of my board were from many states. And in the evenings talking about what you do in your school system and I mentioned the regional center, and we were in our infancy, and they were telling me what they were doing in their particular states. Most of those organizations were state supported. We primarily thought we're going to try to present as many programs to the schools so that would impact kids, do things for them that they could not do for themselves. You know, and that might involve something in capital outlay, something that the schools might want to buy, something for their athletic field, something that tore up the turf. 2 or 3 schools go together and buy it. You only use it once or twice a year. Why should one school just buy it and have that expense of money all the time? So let's divide it 3 ways, 4 ways, and we'll work among the 4 of us to decide when it's time, or we'll schedule it. But that impacts kids. Once we started, we decided that we were going to have a 3-part program. That was our media program, and we were going to have a library, and we anticipated that we would grow with library, with cooperative purchasing, which is still a very big part of the Greenbush program. And then we had equipment repair.
That we had no place to repair audiovisual equipment. And that was one of the first things that the service center provided.
We knew that we were going to have to stock our media program with 16 millimeter films. And to do that, you got to have 16 millimeter projectors. Now, we found out that there were many 16 millimeter projectors in the schools. But when you went to look for them, you found them in closets, dusty, maybe down a basement.
They weren't being used.
Weren't being used because there wasn't that many 16 millimeter film for educational purpose out there for the individual schools. And if they were costly. So the board realized that we had to do 2 things. We had to get those 16 millimeter projectors out. We had to get them so it could be used, and then we had to provide for repairing them.
One of the keys for Greenbush has been that nimble governance structure. While Dr. Hatterline was clearly the instigator and the leader in some of that, there were others, Doc Rowland over at Erie and Bob Kustersteffen up at Yates Center, who were on that original governing board, who, as Pat was pointing out, also had this ability to look outside what was being done now and to be risk takers. I mean, I'm sure for them on a part of a governing board which didn't have any resources to say, okay, if Dave wants to do this, we'll give him the ability to go ahead and do something that has no apparent financial backing whatsoever, and tell us it'll work out, and for the most part it obviously did.
Our first program was the media center, and David takes some 16 millimeter film that we have bought, that we've leased, that we have purchased, that we have stolen. Any way we could get him, put him in his back of the trunk of his car and go to 2 or 3 schools to start it out. Kind of give us a start of how we do this. And you're sitting back there, where is the money going to come from? $2 a student in those days. You know, where will the money come from? And we, as one of the superintendents told me, he says, they tell me you don't smoke, Adeline, but I'm positive you're smoking something.
But my first recollection of Greenbush is coming to Greenbush when I was 8 or 9 years old to what was then a 4-room school and a church and a house, and playing on the playground equipment at St. Aloysius grade school, or in the building if the weather was bad. And that was because my uncle was the parish priest at Greenbush, or at St. Aloysius. So when I went to work at KASB, and my then boss, Dr. Mary McGee, started talking about what was going on at Greenbush, I thought, what are they doing down at St. Aloysius? Because my only memory was that that's all there was in Greenbush, was a couple houses, the St. Aloysius church and the grade school. And then I began learning what had happened and the development of, as John said, the service center and all the programs that even at that time were pretty extensive. Nothing compared to what they have today, but pretty impressive for a group of schools and to be offering to other schools. And then I had the opportunity to meet Dave DeMoss and Dr. Hadeline, and I generally became involved when legal issues arose for Greenbush, either through contracts or employment issues or expansion of services into other areas, including the offering of the special purpose schools at various state institutions.
Perhaps the most important event that happened in Greenbush at that time, which is now carried over, was when we were given the opportunity to take over the operation of the Parsons State Hospital Special Purpose School. When we were allowed to do that, that was a super contract. We went there and we really gutted that program and started teaching kids and started making their day a good day and something that was workable for them. And having the other special purpose schools seeing that this was happening here gave us the opportunity later to go to Winfield and then later to KNI in Topeka. And that's how we grew, in the sense of the word. That's how we more or less exploded onto the scene. The board decided that we should hire at least a half-time individual to come in and repair. And I think it was John Stevens at that time, and John's still with us, isn't he? John took a little hiatus, went out on private business for a while, but he's back with us and with a tremendous amount of experience and did a great job for us. During those years, we had what we called the summer roundup. After school was out, the van drivers picked up the projectors and brought them in. And it was like taking your car, you know, and getting it serviced. They worked them over, put new bulbs in, new fans and things of that sort, got them all ready, got them back to school so they could start.
The films would come in off the route, of course, in their canisters, and there was a big machine, and we would just put it on and run it through. There was some gauze strips that was just a continuous gauze strip, and the film would run through those and end up back on another spool. And if it had broke, there was a splicer, and you had to cut it just right, and then splice the film back together and repair the film. So it would be ready to go out again for the next route.
The concept was rather new, yet it was being done in many, many states. And before we really came down on any hard and fast policy about what we were going to do, we visited different states. We visited Texas and Iowa and Nebraska and St. Louis, Missouri, and we probably had a couple of others that we visited. When we visited the media center in St. Louis County, one of the oldest media centers at that time in the United States, we found that what we had started here was completely wrong. We absolutely were doing things backwards.
How so?
Well, in making copies and things of that sort. For you got a 16 millimeter film about Christmas time, holidays, and you have one or two films, and then you have yourself stocked up over here with so many other films. But what you really need is something that is going to be used annually by your teacher. So you need to supply yourself with many, many, many copies of those individual films and go light on some of the others. So we came home and we didn't have that much invested that it was a big problem for us to turn around. But I'm glad we made those trips. And we made those trips with, we thought long and hard before we made them because we didn't have any money. So that was the big thing. We were operating here to start with on $40,000 grant that a gentleman that we will always be, he will always be tops on my list. His name was Wilbur Rawson, spelled R-A-W-S-O-N, from the State Department, and he allowed us $40,000 for a continuation of some of those grants that were from Erie, and that was what kept us alive. And I'm thinking back about that original $40,000 that Wilbur allowed us to have. We were supposed to, that was supposed to be money in kind. We were supposed to maybe just, match that. And if perhaps maybe give some of it back. Well, that never happened, and Wilbur knew it wasn't going to happen, but it also says something for the Kansas State Department of Education, especially in the vocational area, that they saw a glimmer of light down here in the Balkan area that they thought with a little infusion might be successful.
And how many were on staff at that time?
Three.
Dave?
Dave and Peggy and Judy.
My husband, Mr. Gifford, was the special ed director, and he and Dave worked together on some programs, and I don't know if they thought I needed gainful employment or what, but that's how I found out about Greenbush and came out here. And when I first got to Greenbush, it was just the very original little school building, and the highway ran on the back side of the school. So when my first day at Greenbush, I come around to the front door, which was at the back side of the building, and when I got here that morning, there was a bicycle rider had stopped. I'm quite sure probably he spent the night in the shelter there on the step, and he was as startled as I was.
And then we sent the building trades class from Girard. That was one of the vocational programs that were set up by this federal grant, and I think Dave had something to do with that. If not, I think he was the one that really came to Girard and got that set up for us. They came out here, the kids in the building trades class, and they divided the classrooms into three, like 3 rooms, 3 offices and that. And we later took the cafeteria And that was made into a meeting room. We put a roof over the gym and put up the upstairs. And that's the upstairs that you still have in the original building.
Okay, and there was a loft in part of the gym, and that's where the career education activity kits were kept. And I'd have to go up the stairs and to get these Seek kits, and on the way up the stairs you could see the birds flying through the top of the gym, and you'd have to fight them off to get the particular Seek kits you were after to send out to the schools, get that ready to go. And
when I walked in out here to the building, I walked in to what I thought was going to be the gymnasium. And they had already partitioned off the gymnasium. And they had made a hallway and a huge meeting room. And I was surprised, because the time before I had been here, we played basketball in that gymnasium. But it had changed so much, and it was exciting. And they introduced you to everyone, and Marilyn Jerry was out here. She's Marilyn Vietti now, and her daughter works out at RISA. But Marilyn was working in the business office, and I knew her because her husband was my doctor too. But anyhow, they take you around and they introduce you to everyone, and as you're going through the building, and like I said, you walk in, the first room is the gymnasium. And then you go over where you knew classrooms used to be, because this used to be a schoolhouse. Well, they had made offices into it. And so you didn't expect, you just don't expect it when you first walk in, because outside it looked the same. The old propane tanks out in the middle of the driveway, but it had changed a lot.
What is now the main office, that was all one room, and I was in there with about 3 or 4 other people, and we had one phone that we shared and one electric typewriter.
We were running film routes every 3 days, and so we had to pull a route, and when the films came in, they had to be cleaned, or they had to be spliced together. And then at that time, the VHS tapes, we were a pilot program with KCPT out of Kansas City, because we didn't have public television around here. And so the KCPT would make the masters and send them down, and then Loretta Hofer would make copies of those and send it out to the schools that belonged to that program, because otherwise our kids didn't have 321 Contact or the different things that was on the public television. And Connie did all the booking by hand. It was really something, and we were just starting to introduce software. We had a contract with Apple, and we would order in. We had to get $5,000 in order with orders before we could get the discount, because at that time Apple did tier pricing, and we always wanted to get the best price. So the schools would send their POs in, and we'd order it all together, and then all the Apple computer products would come in here, and then we'd have to separate them and either deliver them to the schools or ship them to the schools. And Randy or John Stevens or Wayne Stevens and I would go out and install the Apple computers in the schools.
I was to answer the phone for Dave, and we had a gentleman call. I didn't know the scope of Greenbush, had no idea. And we had a gentleman call, Carl Fowler. I was trying to think of his name. Fowler was his last name. I think it was Carl. Called, and he said he'd like to speak to Dave DeMoss. And I said, could I tell him who was calling? And he said, Carl Fowler from Universal Studios in Hollywood. And I said, oh, yeah, right. And so I learned very quickly that it was indeed Universal Studios from Hollywood, California calling, because we had the 16mm films, and of course that's where we got a lot of the educational films, was through him, I did the cooperative purchasing program, and we didn't have copier machines that we could use to make large number of copies, so we had to use the offset press or a duplicating machine of some kind. I can't even remember now what was the first one, but I know I typed stencils, and then we'd run them off on the duplicator. And on weekends, then I'd get all my little stacks of cooperative purchasing pages ready, and then I'd bring my sisters out here, and we'd go around the table collating, putting our books together. Linda Morse was in the Instructional Media Center, and John was the AV repair. We had Peggy Shepard was the business manager, and Dave.
It's been fascinating to see it grow, but we shouldn't, no one kid themselves. Greenbush is Dave DeMoss. Dave DeMoss single-handedly has made this what it is. He's watched closely and hired good help, and has supported his people when they had ideas, things that might happen. So we can talk about the Superintendent's Council and the boards and that sort of thing, but really, Greenbush is Dave DeMoss.
There is no way that you can measure what Dave has done for this organization. I mean, it's been his guts, his vision, his ability.
How do you describe Dave DeMoss? You can't. You know, he just was such an exceptional man. And he instilled what the Greenbush, you know, I mean, Greenbush has my heart. And Dave, he just taught you how to do that. There was just something about it that when you started working for him, you wanted to do the very best job you could. And his statement, there's no chat pile too high, whatever you need to do, you just figured out a way to do it.
I think that so much of what Greenbush is Dave DeMoss. I mean, he is a mover and a shaker. He is not afraid to try something new, and he has an uncanny ability to find people who are good for the role, and then he has the confidence in them to let them go with it and not be right on top of them saying, no, you need to do it this way, or no, you need to do it that way. I think that, you know, I've seen time after time, especially when we very first started, that, you know, he'd say, well, we're going to try this, you start with it, and, you know, if this goes, then we'll get some staff to do that. And he's continued to do that until we've got innumerable buildings and staff.
Greenbush owes so much to two people in terms of its success. Greenbush has obviously been a visionary kind of entity in the development of post-service centers and education programs. Dr. Bob Hatterline has one of the buildings here named after him, a rare circumstance for a living person. As the great school in Girard is named after him, the building here at Greenbush is named after him. I think much of the vision for doing something came from Dr. Hatterline's impetus. And the second thing, which I think nobody could have predicted or understood, was the hiring of David DeMoss to be the director of Greenbush. And as I said, in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit, Dave has exemplified that during all the time Greenbush. And if you don't have that kind of leadership, then you don't have the kinds of programs you have here.
But Dave has done something that all good leaders do, and that's surround yourself with good people. And I think you can go across the board at Greenbush and you're going to find good people. At any level that we're talking about, they're just great people. They have service-oriented minds. They really go out to please and do whatever they can to help these school districts and help kids.
The real success of Greenbush comes from the employees, the quality of people. I wish I could understand more how our administrators get the quality of people that we get to work here at Greenbush.
The people who work here are special people in many ways, and I think that we will continue to go forward in a very positive way. We will continue to improve not only education in Southeast Kansas, but in other parts of Kansas, and even sometimes we slip across the borders into some of our neighboring states.
You could compare Greenbush, I think, to the culture that happens in some very successful corporate areas that you've read about. The history of whether you're talking about Microsoft or Apple or some other areas where you hire bright, young, enthusiastic young people and you let them go. And I have always seen that attitude at Greenbush, along with then having, whether it's the superintendent's council, if you will, the gray hair oversight and experience involved at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that meshing and the ability of the people who've been here for 30 years to recognize you need both. You need that experienced, that more seasoned view, and you need that youthful enthusiasm. And making those work together is not always successful. Not everybody can take that and merge that into a positive thing. But I think Greenbush overall has done that.
Well, first of all, it's for the employees, it's more or less an entirely different type of life. You come here and you immediately realize that this is sort of a family. And everybody knows when your birthday is, or when there's an addition to the family.
We were such a close-knit family that we cooked our meals together. We occasionally would have, like on a special Friday or something, we'd decide, okay, our menu was going to be egg rolls. And as we had a few more people come, Wilda Pentola was a great egg roll. Oh man, she could make the best egg rolls. And so we brought all the ingredients and all the fryers and everything out here one day, and we made egg rolls. And everybody just enjoyed the meal, and a lot of times we'd pick somebody's desk and we'd go sit around that desk and have our meal together. You know, it was just family.
One of the big things we've been fortunate with, we've had good people, good employees. We've had loyalty, and then there is a dedication out here that, as you well know, it's just something that sort of like the unwritten law. You come here and get along. You come here to work, go through that door, and you give it your best.
I was at Uniontown 16 years. Planned to stay there until I retired. I got a call one day from Mitch Ricketts, and he says, I'd like for you to come down here. That wasn't out of the ordinary. Mitch would have me come down to do something at different times. So I had just crawled out from underneath the bus. I had grease on my t-shirt, but I came to Greenbush. I walked into his office. He said, let's go across the street. So we walked over to John Staten's office, and I was having a job interview, unbeknownst to me. When I first came here, Mitch hired me to fulfill a grant that he had. And my job for the first 12 months was to raise the awareness of Kansas school children to the hazards of radon.
I started back in 1980, and at that time, one of the main things that I was hired to do was staff development activities for Title I teachers. That, along with supervising the special ed component that was here at Greenbush.
My first experience working with Greenbush was in the Leadership Academy. I came over as an assistant principal from Cherryville, and as I'm going through this program, I was just amazed at the collegiality that was expressed and everything that went on. And so when I finished and actually graduated from the Leadership Academy as an assistant principal, I just begged and pleaded to be part of it more if I could, and was able to get on the Leadership Academy Advisory Board, and you know, that's been just an absolutely wonderful experience for me ever since.
It's not often in public education that you see real risk takers. You know, that public education isn't an area where everyone's always out on the cutting edge or willing to take a chance or willing to do something and fail.
what about those small school districts? Why are kids not being cheated in those districts? And my answer to that is, I think that some of our smallest school districts survive now because of the things that are provided by Greenbush out there to them, and what it is that they can do as far as seeing that programs get to them, and an opportunity for them to actually come on site. When we first started building things on site, I think we were all, what are we doing now, kind of, but when you look at the Greenbush site today and see what it is that they've been able to accomplish with grants and with just plain old donations from people who have money that they want to see go to work in a very positive way. It's amazing the kinds of things that we do, from astronomy to the science center.
I always knew, after I'd worked for Dave a while, and you could see you didn't know where he was going. You had no way of knowing how far he was going to take it. But you always knew that this was pretty special. This was not just an ordinary run-of-the-mill service. No, you always knew this was going to be something pretty spectacular. No way did you know how far it was going to go. But I remember one time I was sitting in the old kitchen, and there was nothing. We just had the original building, And I was sitting there with a salesman from Modern Business over at Springfield. He had been. We were bidding for a new copy machine, and we were sitting back in the old kitchen talking about that. And we looked out the kitchen window, and I said, Glenn, Pappy, they called him. I said, Pappy, one of these days I think there's going to be a building sitting over there on that grass. And he said, oh, Judy, no. And I said, I'll bet you there is. I just bet there is. And it wasn't too long. And Dave really had things popping, and we started growing.
You can't get too far out on your own a limb trying to do things that will not funnel back and to have an impact on kids. Because if you don't impact kids, go someplace else. That's why we're here.